interested,
Cool.
go for it.
Cool. So this is, how I was going to start. I was going to mess with you guys and say that we are going to talk about accounting today, but I'm not going to do that to you. I promise. It's actually, I thought it would be much more fun to, I don't know if you'd find the humor in that, but I thought it'd be much more fun for me just to share stories and share a few of the things that I certainly wish I had learned early on as an entrepreneur. It was interesting before I get into this. So my business partner from my first business and I caught up, and it's fun to reflect back about how naive you were when you were young and how fun it was and all the wins and all the losses and all the people that screwed you over and the shin kicks you took, especially after you've had a nice exit. And so my business partner's name was Zubin, and we got caught up, and we laughed and we smiled and we said, boy, I wish someone had told us this and I wish someone had told us that. And so this is that was where the energy came from for this. Is I said, well, what am I going to tell these students here? I'm certainly not going to bore them with accounting and finance, and it's important stuff for sure. But I thought, what am I going to tell them that's going to be interesting? And so I'm going to weave some quotes through this, but I'm going to do a lot of storytelling. And then the other thing I would say is that I don't like lecturing. I'm not a lecturer necessarily. I'm more of an advisor and a mentor. So please feel free to pause me. And I can't see the chat. It's buried. As you know, when you present, it kind of gets buried in the Zoom meeting. But please feel just to unmute yourself and ask. Like, I want this to be a conversation as well. And then real quick, how much time do I have? Or how much time have you allotted for this?
You have until the Zoom runs until 5:30. So
okay, I don't want to take quite until 5:30. I don't have that many slides, but we'll crank along until you guys are sick of me, and then I'll leave. Anyhow, so I thought today, this is kind of what I was thinking. Obviously, it's some of you know me, most of you don't. So I will introduce myself and tell you a little bit more about my background. We're going to cover 10 ideas. These are from some of my favorite people. One of these people was my professor at Berkeley, Haas School of Business. And I believe to be the father of modern day entrepreneurship. I'm going to tell you a couple funny stories about him and what advice he gave to people like me. In fact, he gave to a good friend of mine at the very end of our semester with him. We're going to talk about that, but also I want to make sure this is a conversation. So please ask questions. Let's make this rich and fun. I mean, this is an Wednesday afternoon. Let's have some fun with it. Also, I'm going to include as many stories as I can in there to make it as personal and fun. And then lastly, this is really relevant because over the last 4 years, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, I've been advising young entrepreneurs, and it's been in the first year or two. I think that I just didn't have enough experience with it, and I was sort of seeing things through my eyes. And the one thing when you're old or older, you have the luxury of history, and there's some amazing things you learn from that. You guys have for the most part, have the luxury of youth, and I would trade you any day. But I will say that it's been interesting advising young people, and just the conversations we get into, and what kind of I was thinking I should expect and what I really should be expecting. But the future's bright, and I think that's kind of the message I want to leave you with today at the end, is that this is a stinking cool thing, being an entrepreneur, but it's not without its potential shin kicks, and we're going to talk about those aplenty over the course of the next, and then of course Q&A. So, okay, really quick about me. I've been an entrepreneur for the vast majority of my life. I started my life as a technology project manager. I started working in infrastructure projects. I built big data centers for some of the larger businesses in the Silicon Valley. Data centers back in the day before AWS and GCP and Azure, we actually had to build them for ourselves. In other words, all the servers and everything, all the storage area networks and everything else. So that's what I did. Then I got into software development projects, and I was leading teams. I worked at PayPal. I worked at Electronic Arts. I worked at Visa. I worked at Cisco. I worked a lot of places. And I worked on projects for those businesses and learned a ton, met some neat people. Along the way, somehow, I decided I wanted to start my first business. My first business, which still exists today, it's cprime, cprime.com. You can go check it out. I don't own it anymore, but that was the business I started. And it was all around creating an outsourced technology services education. And we did a lot of VAR, which stands for value added reseller. Basically means we just sell software and products to companies. Started that, built that, and sold that to a company called Alton out of Paris, France, which was pretty cool. I will tell you, doing deals with the Parisians, they are lovely people, but they tend to like red wine a lot more than getting deals done. So that deal took a year to close, and I'm pretty sure it aged me 10. But we did get the deal done, and that was great. They were absolutely amazing human beings, and they were very honest And I'm proud that we were able to get that deal done. It's a cool company. It's called Alton. It's a big multinational. One of the cooler experiences I had was I sat on the board of a not-for-profit at Haas School of Business, which is where I did my business school. And it's called Boost. And it's one of those things where entrepreneurship's always been a part of my life, right? Entrepreneur, entrepreneur, entrepreneur. But this is one of those times where I got to work with 6th through 12th graders, and we got to see how entrepreneurship could affect positively low-income minority students using a framework like entrepreneurship. And of course, we were using the framework in a traditional sense to help them build businesses, but our real primary goal was to help them build confidence and ultimately to send them off to college. And it's one of those proud statistics, you know, in the world of KPIs, and we all track KPIs, key performance indicators, we had 100% success rate sending these kids who are often first-time collegians, or if, I don't know if that's a word, but basically people that went to college. They were oftentimes the first person from their family to go, and 100% of them went to 2- and 4-year institutions. That was really cool. And it was one of those opportunities for me to see that entrepreneurship can be so much more than just an incredible framework for navigating a very uncertain environment, you know, to create a business for a particular purpose. Nuvola was my second business. I started, this is one of those stories I won't get into today, but I will happily share the story another time. When it's like, you know, this can't fail. There's no possible way. I founded it with a chief technology officer from Groupon. It was myself and one other person, and it was a hot mess. So sometimes just because you put the right pieces together doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have success. Eric Ries tells a very interesting story about this as well. I learned this firsthand. As of recent, I'm a guest lecturer, mentor, and advisor at the San Diego State Zip Launchpad. I work with some people on this call, and I'm what's called the L2 advisor. And I don't know if that means anything to you. I think a lot of you are part of Lavin or Zip, so you probably understand intuitively what that means. But basically, I work with students who are kind of later stage. They're getting ready to leave. They're getting ready to do actual business. They're commercializing their product or service, doing actual business, creating, you know, generating revenue, spending money on expenses, all that stuff. So that's the teams I work with. Been doing that for about 4 years. How I got involved is actually pretty funny, but I don't know if I have time for that. Maybe I'll share it at the end. Okay, so then most recently, I got very involved in education, and I've never been an ed tech entrepreneur, but I am now. I'm officially an ed tech entrepreneur. In other words, I'm focusing on the technology around education, and I'm very interested in seeing how I can be involved in an education play that improves the learning experiences for people your age, believe it or not, just because I'm pretty frustrated with it myself. I was frustrated with it when I went through it, and I'm frustrated with it now. So that's what I'm doing now. It's obviously a content platform. I have some of the people that are in my workshop now are on this Zoom call now. So you know kind of what I do, but behind the scenes, there's a technology play that I don't really publicize. So again, my education, interesting, but the most interesting piece there by far is that I'm a San Diego State alum. So that's actually been really cool. I never in a million years thought I would be ever teaching at San Diego State. I don't know where you're at in your academics. I was an okay student. I wouldn't say that I was the best of students. And so to think that I'm actually back now influencing young people and young entrepreneurs, the coolest kind of young people, has been pretty awesome. So that's a story about me. Sorry, I made that a little more long-winded than I normally do. So, okay, so over the next 10 slides, I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to share, if you don't know some of these people, I'm going to tell you need to go, I'm going to actually assign, I'm kidding, I'm not going to assign homework. But, you know, definitely go research some of these people, because I think if you're going to pursue this entrepreneur thing, I really do think you need to understand some of the key players, some of the thought leaders in the space. I'm sure that a lot of you watch people on YouTube that you respect that are entrepreneurs, or, you know, have a bent for being an entrepreneur. I certainly do. I was recently on, I listened to a podcast with the founder of Levels, which is this new health tech startup. It's for continuous glucose monitoring out of the Silicon Valley. They're a Y Combinator graduate. And I just learned so much from listening to these entrepreneurs, you know, constantly. So, okay, so this first person here, does anyone know who this is? Anyone know who Steve Blank is? And I should say this, does anyone not know who Steve Blank is? You know who Steve Blank is? All right. Not know. Is that yes? I should ask, be clear. Hands up mean you don't know. All right. All right. You need to go and get to know Steve Blank. So Steve Blank was my professor at Berkeley. He also taught at Stanford. He is by far and away I'd say the godfather in kind of a funny way, but he's definitely the father of modern day entrepreneurship. He was the original iterative thought leader. And he wrote a book called The 4 Steps of the Epiphany. And he was actually Eric Ries's mentor. So a lot of people don't know that, in fact, you will actually see, if you read very carefully The Lean Startup, which is another great book you need to read if you haven't already, you will see that Steve Blank has actually given a few shout outs in the book, because Steve Blank mentored Eric Ries. And at the time, I don't remember what business he was actively building, but Steve Blank is that guy you really need to understand, because this is where it all began. He tells some amazing stories about, back in the day when he was building businesses in Palo Alto. You got to kind of imagine Silicon Valley, early days. First of all, the only people that built businesses were the absolute nerds of the world. Like, he describes himself as a nerd. You got to look at, like, who was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak? They were nerds, like, and Steve Blank was a nerd too. And this was not a cool profession. This was not something you headed off and did because people are going to think you're cool. This is something you did because you had what he describes as an irrational passion. It was a calling. He often describes being an entrepreneur as having like, you're just being called. It's almost like a voice in your head that you can't get out. So I think this is a fantastic quote, and we're going to talk about this here a little bit because it's incredibly relevant, to sticking with being an entrepreneur, because it's so fun to get started. It's really hard to stick with. So the quote is, a startup is an irrational passion. It's not a job. Normal people have jobs. I love how he describes, that everyone not an entrepreneur is normal. Makes kind of sense, I guess, a little bit. But entrepreneurs are irrational. It's not a job choice. It's not a career choice. It's a virus that's gotten into your head and you need to get it out. So he tells this funny story about, in every semester, he would have the same sort of number of students come up to his podium on the last day of class, and they'd say, Steve, got a question. I'm considering doing, these two things that are on my plate to do. I've got this incredible job at McKinsey, which is, if you don't know it, it's a very, very large management consulting firm, very top of the line, or BCG, one of these other very, very premier sort of consulting firms. And he said, but I'm also thinking about doing the startup with a couple of friends. And so Steve would, start to smile and shake his head and say, well, the choice is clear. You've already decided. And he said, go take the job at McKinsey. And of course, the students look at him and say, what? You teach entrepreneurship, and yet you're telling me to leave this path. And he said, this isn't a job. This isn't something you just say, this is not a job substitute. This isn't say, well, it's either this or that. Say, this is something that you're doing because you're so insanely passionate about it that this is just something I have to go try. And I will tell you that if you're not insanely passionate, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, you probably won't stick with it. And this is a recurring theme over the first 3 slides. So really interesting guy. Strongly encourage you to get to know his early teachings. You don't need to read the book. Don't buy the book, The 4 Steps, but go watch a couple of videos online on YouTube. Just spend 20 minutes. It'll be well worth it. Okay, so this one too, and this is going to lead in, we're leading in a very clear direction here. And I like this one too, because no one really forewarned me about this. So I'll tell you a story about last night first, and then I'll talk to you about Sir Richard Branson, who I just love. I think he's such an interesting character. So last night, well, first of all, I wake up at 4. I know you guys think I'm nuts, but I wake up at 4 every morning. I'm in the gym by 5. I usually get about 40 minutes of work done while I'm having my coffee, usually just planning the day. Then I'm back in the office at 7:30 after my wife works out, and I pretty much work until whenever. And last night it was about 6 o'clock at night. I went out to get some stir fry. I had work to do at 6 o'clock at night, and I said, well, okay, I'm heading back into the office. I'm going to go back into work. And of course, my wife looked at me and said, hell you are. And it's one of those things where you don't realize that there's no one telling you where to be and when to be there. You work your ass off, and you're working your ass off for you. But this is the honest to God truth. And I love this slide because it's so true. It's not a job. We already know that, but it's also, this is what crazy people do. We're willing to go work 100 hours a week so that we don't have to go work 40 hours for someone else. And it's such a great, because it's so true. I would so rather wake up at 4 a.m. every morning than work for myself than have to go work for someone else. Right. And that's kind of one of those true entrepreneurial things that I believe in what I'm doing so much, that I'm going to go do this because it's absolutely insane. So that's the note. And then lastly is this, and I thought this was an interesting statistic. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but I often hypothesized and, opined about these things and how long do you think it'll take for me to get to where I really want to go? And so I found this really interesting article from startups.co, and this guy, Will Schroeder, had written it based on a huge amount of data. He did this surveys of all these companies that actually got where they wanted to go. And he said, well, how long did it take you to get there? And based on the analysis that he did, basically it was this, is that it's going to take you 4 years just to get to the point pointed towards a real business, just pointed towards a real business, which I thought was crazy. And I can definitely relate to this one. and argue that it takes 7 to 10 years to make your startup the success you had in mind when the idea came to you. And that means that there's a commitment. So, and this is where we get back to the same thing over and over and over again, is this concept of passion, and that the passion has to be there. And it has to be something that you absolutely believe in to your core, because there'll be all sorts of reasons why the train stops pretty regularly, and there's all sorts of opportunities to get off the train. The question is, what's keeping you on the train? What keeps you getting up at 4 a.m? What keeps you dealing with the shin kicks and the employee who had just quit, or the CTO that just quit on you, or the contract that you just about had signed that didn't get signed? Like, what's keeping you going? It's got to be more than just the initial excitement. Obviously, that fades very quick. Okay, so quick recap from just the first slide. So, okay, so what did we learn? It's not a job. It's a calling. 100 hours per week, because I don't want to go work for someone else, in 10 years. So what's the theme here? It's passion, right? It's like there's got to be some sort of passion and perseverance model. And I would just say that as you choose what you're going to do, make sure that you satisfy this base sort of criteria. And I can't remember who I was having the conversation with, but a lot of people feel a lot of pressure to go start a business, and they'll come up with an idea just because it's like, well, that's what I do. I'm in the Entrepreneur Society. I graduated from Lavin. I'm in Zip. Blah blah blah. I got to start something. And my advice to them is that it's okay to go work for someone else for a while. Especially if you go work for someone else that's in a startup that's maybe a funded startup or early stages, and learn until you figure out what that is. What's your calling? What's your passion? Don't feel obligated to have your passion right out of the chute. If it happens, that's fantastic, and God bless you. But if it doesn't happen, don't be hard on yourself. And I think that's the one piece of advice I would give everyone on this call, is that it's okay to wait until this pisses me off. I want to solve this. It's pissing me off, and the world would be a better place with this, and wait for that thing to happen. Good opportunity to pause. Should I pause here? Any questions so far? We're doing pretty well on time, so I won't take up the entire hour and a half. Feel free just to blurt it out. Nope. Okay. Feel free to
I did
interrupt
have
me.
a question. I saw you got an MBA from Berkeley and Columbia. I was curious.
Go ahead. No, that's a good question. Go ahead.
If you got one from each, or you did like part of one and then transferred, and what made you do that?
Yeah, I do have 2 MBAs. Yeah, because I just needed 2. It makes sense, right? It was actually it's a good question. I get that periodically. It was a program. It was a really unique program offered. It was a partnership between Haas School of Business and Columbia Business School. And the cool thing is, me and my fellow students, we were on planes from San Francisco to New York. I'm flying back and forth between each school. And then we do studies in like Hong Kong School of Business. And we were over in India for a couple of weeks. It was an incredible program, 2 years still, but it was a joint program. So we actually graduated with 2 degrees, which is wild. Like, I don't know why I need to. I usually just tell people I just graduated from Berkeley because it's kind of closer to my home. But anyhow, yeah, funny question. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, just thank you for mentioning that you don't have to start a business right away. There's that pressure, but it's true. You find something. Wait till you find something you really want to do. Not just start something because it's the first thing that came to mind. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, it's if that may be like the one biggest single takeaway from this, is that don't feel the pressure to rush out and do something. We're going to talk about this in the next couple slides, but fall in love with the process. And what process are you referring to, Chris? Well, what I mean is the process of learning about yourself and learning about what you care about and making yourself better. And I love the process. Like, I learn about. And the funny thing is, I learned from you all, like, especially at Zip Launchpad, seeing what growth channels you're experimenting with, and what influencer marketing stuff is working, and how you're dealing with this and that and the other. And fall in love with the process of learning, and that's gonna get you through a lot. And yeah, that's it. Don't feel obligated. Any more questions before I move on? I'll make sure there's plenty of other chances if you don't ask now. Okay, I'll stop periodically. And I'll make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end if you guys have questions. So a lot of people get very excited about ideas. And I actually had one student who will remain nameless, who gave a sizable chunk of equity to a co-founder who was not an operating co-founder. What I mean by that is they weren't actually doing anything with the company, but just was at the drunken party one night where the idea came up. And I about came effing unglued when I found out, because I said, I don't give a shit about an idea. Everyone's got ideas. I hear ideas all the time. In fact, the idea I'm currently pursuing, Another person who's a very prominent Silicon Valley entrepreneur is pursuing the same thing, only because he put it all out on his like a web page, you know. And I'm like, so ideas are ideas. It's who can execute. And I think this is the most important thing: is don't get too hung up on ideas, because they're really not all that exciting. Really, what's exciting is the ability to execute. And I learned this the hard way. And I've seen students get pretty excited about ideas and overvalue ideas and undervalue execution big time. So let's talk about this. Ideas are this is pretty harsh, but we'll soften it a little bit. Ideas are cheap. Ideas are easy. Ideas are common. Everybody has ideas. Ideas are highly overvalued. Execution is all that matters. And I will tell you, this is absolutely the truth, is that I see too many students come into the Zip Launchpad, or I should just say in entrepreneurship in general, that have, like, you know, an idea, and it's like, you know, it's like, wow, this is a great idea. And I'm not saying it's not. There's plenty of really good ideas. But being able to execute on that idea is really where you're going to see, can you do this or not? Because the execution is the hyper complex. It's 0.0001% idea and 99.999% execution. And maybe that's not enough of a difference between the two. So I just want to make sure you understand that, look, ideas will come and go, and, you know, but it's about execution. And one of the other cool things is that sometimes you'll see people with ideas that seem pretty not so exciting. It's like, well, that's not particularly revolutionary. That's not particularly new. But the way in which they present it, they find lanes to travel in business. And I think that's particularly interesting. So the company I just mentioned to you, Levels, it's a health tech company out of Y Combinator. I was listening to, they have 35,000 pre-orders, basically customers before they actually launched, which is absolutely insane. And, you know, just thinking about the fact that what they do is not particularly revolutionary. It's a continuous glucose monitor. You probably have heard others, Dexcom's in a big one, but they just created it in a way that it's actually, it's consumable by, you know, the average Joe, like people like me and you know, and it's like, but the way they did it, the way they executed on that idea is absolutely badass. So just remember, ideas are important, yes, but how you execute on them is really, really important. And that's where a lot of the fun is. That's where a lot of the creativity is, in my personal opinion. That's where I spend a lot of my time. It's not so much on the idea, it's about how do you execute on it. This one is fantastic. I'm a huge Cuban fan. I think sometimes if you just read what he says, you're going to walk away feeling pretty bummed at times. But let me translate this one for you. So we'll read it. This one I'm going to start by reading it first, and then we'll talk about it. Because I really do think, you know, when you do decide that you're going to start your business, I think it's super, super important that you understand that you're always following the money. And it sounds horrible. It sounds like, oh, you filthy capitalist, you know, but the truth of the matter is, no matter what we're doing, whether we're starting a not-for-profit, and I work with some of them, all the way to, you know, just for-profits that are very socially, called social capitalism, you know, very socially responsible capitalistic businesses, you've got to keep an eye on the money. And the money is going to tell us a lot about a lot. So let me read the quote first. I'll translate it and then we'll discuss. So follow your passion is easily the worst advice you could ever be given or get. Passions aren't worth a nickel. Follow the green, not the dream. So let me translate first. I don't think he's not saying don't follow your passion. What he is saying, I believe, I just like to believe this, is that you should follow your passion intelligently. With a very good business model and a very good business plan that leads to profitability. Does that sound better? So don't not follow your passion, but just do so in a very intelligent way. I think this is one of those things where you can kind of look at the, you know, I can't remember, someone like from, I was on a call with someone from the UCSD Brink, and she said, you know, does anyone think that killing seals is good? Or like, does anyone not think killing seals is bad or something like that? And, you know, well, of course it's bad, you know, but there's just certain things we can all agree on. But, you know, like cleaning the ocean, here's a good example. You know, who doesn't agree that we should all clean the ocean? I mean, it's basically the world's dumpster. It's a horrible thing. We should all clean the ocean, but how are you going to make any money doing it? Unfortunately, there's no, at least to this point, not a clear path outside of, you know, not-for-profits who do a phenomenal job of doing it. But outside of that, there's really not a good way to do it. So there's a lot of things that your passion can be involved. It can drive you in a good direction, but there's just no business model for. So you really have to have an eye on the business model. I work with a couple of teams who are doing amazing things, but sometimes what you'll find is the gross margin of that business is just very low. And you're like, this might not be enough for you to have a viable, scalable business down the road. So again, it's just really sound advice to always keep your eye on the money, because one of the things I will tell you, if you have an eye on the money and you can make money doing it, chances are you're doing something else. And that means you're solving someone's problem. And if you're solving someone's problem, you're heading in the right direction. You're making the world a better place, so to speak. You're solving someone's problem by following the money. Hopefully that makes sense. We start to get into some of the other ones now. And one of the things that I see students do all too much is compare themselves. They spend way more time looking left and right than looking forward and backwards. And Bill Gates says it best, don't compare yourself to anyone in the world. If you do, you're insulting yourself. And the truth is, because you're very unique, and there's two slides that are sort of similar here. I see all too often students compare themselves. And it happens a lot when, someone like raises money. And it's like, oh my gosh, did you see Bob started a business, or Mary started a business and they raised $3 million from Sequoia? Oh, that's so amazing. And then you obviously feel down like, well, why am I not raising $3 million from Sequoia? Comparing yourself and your journey with someone else's journey is a horrible idea as an entrepreneur. My businesses were all bootstrapped. I didn't raise money. I didn't have Kleiner Perkins or Sequoia or some of these big, social capital. I didn't have some of these big VC firms on my resume. But I'll tell you, the first business I built has now cleared $100 million in revenue. I bootstrapped the thing. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. I think one of the things you have to be very careful about is comparing. And I think that only bad can come from it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't learn from people. I just mean don't compare yourself to people. I think there's a tremendous amount of knowledge you can gain by listening. Hey, what did you try? But your journey is your journey, right? So don't compare yourself with anyone. And then this is really interesting. I don't know if you've seen this before. This is I think they call this the pit of despair. My business partner sent this to me. And, so here's how a typical startup works, right? It's like, well, this is what people see. In the very beginning, before the startup, you're feeling pretty good. But as soon as you launch it, it is the best of times, right? Initial enthusiasm. And then of course, reality starts to set in because, well, this shit's hard, real hard. And the customers aren't coming the way I expected. And then you end up, down at the bottom, you're experimenting and pivoting and trying growth channels, and you launch your product and no one comes, and you wobble around in this pit of despair, which is when it gets all the way down till it starts working. And then eventually you have product market fit and scale. But here's what's interesting. So this red line, anything above the red line is what people outside of your world see. They see the initial enthusiasm and the successful exit. What they don't see is you wallowing in the pit of despair. So that's when we compare ourselves to other people. What we're comparing is just like the Instagram world that we live in. It's like every day, like people are on the beach having Coronas, with, celebrities. It's like, no, that's not how they live life. Just like that, when we compare ourselves as entrepreneurs to other entrepreneurs, we're seeing the initial enthusiasm and the occasional successful story as they start to scale at the end. We're certainly not comparing the misery, shin kick, sleepless nights when your mind starts going at midnight and you can't sleep and you're exhausted, shit isn't working. That's not the stuff we compare. So this is the reason why you shouldn't compare, because you're only going to see in the Instagram world in which we live the good, and you will never see the pit of despair. Does that make sense? So any questions here? I'll pause here before I move on to the next one. And don't worry, the pit of despair is not that bad. There's no snakes in there or anything. It's not like Indiana Jones or anything. Okay, so, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Company you started, what was the 29th point that set you apart, that went from the despair part to actually setting yourself up to launch? Because right now I'm in launch 1 for Zip Launchpad, and you have a great idea, like you said, but we're running into a lot of issues. And we're trying to see the light and, to understand how we could turn it around and finally get it launched eventually. So what was your story about that?
Oh man, how much time we got again? I'm just teasing. Let's see if I can make this simple. Well, with the first one, I would say, it was a grind. It was a grind. I think this is where the passion and the perseverance have to come, and you have to really love what you're doing. But the only other piece of advice I would give you to get through the pit of despair, so to speak, is that focus like a hawk on your customer and their problems, and be insanely empathetic and passionate about them being successful, whoever your customers are. Inevitably, you've got to have customers of some sort. So whoever those people are, just being insanely passionate about them, and just know that that's why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, that will get you through it. Now, what was the ultimate catalyst for launching us? I mean, look, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Always is, always will be. And it will be for you too. It's just the way it goes. Every single story I hear, I don't know if you've heard Luke from Course Key speak. He talks about chewing glass. I remember he said 2 people got up and left out of the room when he was speaking. He said starting a business is like chewing glass while on fire, being shot. And you're like, oh my gosh, no one's going to want to do this, Luke. Stop telling people that. But the truth is it's hard. You're going to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And, you just need to understand that it is a process, and fall in love with the process, fall in love with your customers, and just know that this is a long journey, and that it's a marathon, not a race.
Okay. Thank you.
and it'll take some time to figure out. And I look forward to seeing you in L2.
All right, thank you.
Cool, no problem. So, okay, so this one I love. So Noah Kerner, he's the founder of Acorns. I don't know if you know who this is. He was the DJ for, who was he a DJ for? It was a very famous celebrity. And it wasn't Mariah Carey. Or maybe it was Mariah Carey. Anyhow, so he's just a really interesting dude. I listened to, does someone know the answer to that? Let's see. Yeah, okay. Whoops. So he's an interesting dude. And I listened to his, a student of mine from last semester's personal finance thing sent it to me and said, hey, Chris, you got to listen to this. So I did. And I love the advice he gave. And this is very consistent with what Bill Gates just said. And we just talked about. And he says he said it on, I don't think he was supposed to, because it was like entrepreneur.com. So it's like one of those big media platforms. You're not allowed to swear, but I think I can swear here. It's like, run your own fucking race. Like, don't let anyone decide for you what you're going to do. It's your race. This goes really, really hand in hand, but don't compare yourself. Because if you don't run your own race, and if you spend a lot of time comparing yourself, you're just going to be miserable. And that's no way to spend life, frankly. So the way he looked at it, he said, pursue your own path and go your own way. Leave a trail. Look back. It's so great too. You can look back and forward, but not left and right. Run your own effing race and ask yourself these questions instead. What makes you feel good as a human? What makes you feel successful as a person? And what impact are you trying to make? This advice is very consistent with the advice I just gave whoever that was from L1 about, how do you get through the pit of despair? And it's focusing like on the process, what makes you feel successful. You're learning constantly, part of Zip Launchpad and Lavin and part of the Entrepreneur Society. You're going to be around a lot of successful people. Enjoy the process and be really hyper-focused on the problem you're solving and the person you're solving it for. And most importantly, don't worry about who's left and right of you. Just focus on what's in front of you and behind you. A lot to learn from what's happened. And of course, looking forward most of the time. And Acorns is a cool platform. It's something I talk about in the personal finance course. Not a lot, but it's a really nice way of, slowly building up, as you say, putting the acorns away slowly like a squirrel does, which is, of course, where he got its name. Okay, number 8, facing your fear. I don't know if anyone knows who Seth Godin is. He's a really fascinating guy. He started an education platform. He's an ed tech entrepreneur as well. He started a platform called Alt MBA. He's written books. He's done TED Talks. Just a fascinating guy. Stanford MBA. Which I'll let him slide for being a Berkeley guy. But, this is what he says. He says, I believe most people are quite afraid of freedom. We recoil from the freedom just because it brings with it not just responsibility, but the feeling of stupidity. Because the only way to learn something is to start by not knowing how to do it. Every single person on this call has no clue what they're doing, just like I don't. Like, I'm figuring this out as I go. And the sooner we get to know that we're just figuring it out, we're going to surround ourselves with awesome people, and we're going to figure it out along the way, the better. He talks a lot. The reason why I love Seth is that he talks a lot about the fact that we're all scared, frankly. And we'll talk about this in a couple slides. In a lot of places, it doesn't mean that you're living your life scared all the time. It just means that you're trying stuff you'd never tried before, and that's totally okay. And I just love how honest he is about it, and the fact that doubt creeps in. In fact, one of the things he talked about on the podcast I listened to was that he knows that doubt constantly creeps into your world as an entrepreneur, and it's like you've got to find ways. Those rocks that allow you to keep those pillars. Like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm doing this. And again, there's 100,000 reasons why you should quit. You got to have that one really, really strong reason why you should keep going, because those ideas will keep coming at you for those 10 years it takes you to build what you're building. Really interesting guy. I really enjoy listening to him speak. This is super important. We talk a lot about this in Zip Launchpad, especially later stage companies. And I love what Oprah has to say. I really don't think, well, first of all, no one's going to be successful on their own. You're either going to have a founding team, but inevitably, you're probably going to also have advisors and mentors and people that support and surround you, and surrounding yourself with only people who are going to lift you higher. And I think right now, like I have just to help you understand, each one of my businesses, we have an advisory board or a board of directors, depending upon the structure. But I also have personal advisors, and these are people that are, in business, spiritual advisors, kind of people that I want to surround myself with that help me stay really focused. And when I'm having a down day, someone you can call that gets you back on track. And I really think it's important that as you head into this entrepreneur thing, you really think, who are those people that I want around me? And who you place around you is really stinking important. You will not do this without a good group of people around you. And especially as your business gets going and you start scaling, you're going to need trusted advisors, because a lot of this will be net new to you. Some of this is net new to me. I'm a B2B guy. I'm getting ready to head into business, direct to consumer. it's a new world. So I need to surround myself with people that can kind of help me navigate this world, so I don't have to learn the hard way, because I've taken enough shin kicks at this point. I'd like to avoid as many as I can at this point. So surrounding yourself with good people is really important. And then lastly, fearlessness and self-belief. And I think this is the last slide I want to talk. I'm going to share a couple more things, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A. But you know, a lot of people look at, like, you know, this is one of those judging people, or looking at who's over there to the right and to the left. You know, how did that person become so fearless? And the entrepreneur's thinking to himself, are you freaking kidding me? I'm absolutely scared out of my mind. You know, and the truth is that bravery is not the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. And a lot of things that we do as entrepreneurs are putting us in really unique positions we've never been in, to do things we've never done before. And we got to fake it till we make it. I had a great finance professor that always said, just fake it till you make it. You know, and I got a B+, so I guess I faked it well enough. So, you know, it's one of those things where you really do need to just know that it's okay, that these are going to be terrifying things, and that, you know, at times, and that, you know, hey, you know, you're going to get through it. And this is just, you know, what's going to define you later, is that you said, you looked fear in the eye and said, I'm charging it. So that's it. Just a couple last little things, just to kind of summarize a lot of this stuff. So it's all about you and personal development, especially at this age. Is that the fact that you're thinking about being entrepreneurs this young is stinking amazing. Because, you know, whether you find your passion now or you find your passion later, or both, you know, maybe you'll end up with multiple businesses. It doesn't matter. Just enjoy the ride and enjoy the personal development, and look at this as a learning opportunity to soak it all up from the people around you, especially the Lavin and Zip people and everyone else. Really, you know, you're going to be around some really smart people trying some really neat things. So look at this as a personal development path. And then the last thing I'll say is it all worth it? And, you know, all the things I said, some of them not so great, or at least sounding not so great. And the answer is absolutely it is. It's a stinking blast. And I wouldn't change it for the world. You know, there were a lot of sleepless nights. There will be a lot more for me. There will be some for you. And that's okay. This is what we signed up for. It's fun. It's worth it. You know, I would much rather do this than just about anything else. So that's it, folks. Welcome to, I guess it's spring 2021. And yeah, let's do some Q&A, and then, you know, please, by all means, let me know what else you'd like me to do today. I don't know how long you guys are sticking around.
Yeah, Chris, I had a quick question. First of all, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. Really, very insightful.
Thank you.
Honestly,
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I was curious. So now, obviously, we have at least as SDSU students, we have a lot of resources, such as like with the Zip Launchpad,
Yep.
how they can get you in touch with mentors, they can get you in touch with possible investors, employees, a lot of that kind of stuff, to really help out smaller businesses and get those ideas into actual businesses. And I was curious if you had some of those. Did you have those similar resources when you were in college, or when you
Absolutely
were
not.
kind of thinking about that first idea? And did you ever utilize those kinds of things? And how was that experience for you?
Yeah, no, really good question. The answer is absolutely not. There was nothing like this for me at all. First of all, I didn't realize that I wanted to be an entrepreneur until I was in my mid to late 20s. Or at least I didn't know that I wanted to be one. I guess maybe like I kind of knew I wanted to be one, but just didn't, you know, jump on it. But no, there was nothing like this. I mean, this is the cool thing about, you know, like I do all these conferences now. Like Intuit asked me to travel around and do some speaking engagements with them at these entrepreneur conferences. And you won't know the names of these, and it doesn't matter. But long story short is, like, all the incubators from like all the schools and all the off-campus incubators, they get all the people together, and then they just talk about entrepreneurship stuff. Actually, Steve Blank was the guest speaker at the one last semester in Tampa Bay. But long story short, what I find interesting is that, you know, this has all come about very recently. These incubators, on campus, off campus incubators, you know, I don't know when Y Combinator started. I think it was one of the very first. And that's only been around, what, 10 years? You know, so when I was getting started, there was nothing like this. You know, Steve Blank was getting started. Hell, you couldn't even get online and find people to, you know, to collaborate with. So this is really an incredible set of resources. I wouldn't say that being an entrepreneur now is easier than ever, because it's not. It's just as hard as it ever was. Nothing's changed in that, but the access to information and people and resources has changed a lot. And to your point about Zip and Lavin and access to investors and this and that, take advantage of all that, because a lot of us, you know, when we started, we didn't have this. So I would just say, look at this as just a really, really cool opportunity just to, you know, soak it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really beneficial to have these kind of resources. I think that's honestly what really college education is all about, not just the classes, but just as much as about the networking and the resources that you utilize while you're in college. That's a huge aspect of it.
I completely agree with you.
And then also last thing, what was the podcast you were talking about? You said it
Oh,
was the one
so
with
I
that had
referenced a ton of
levels
them.
on it, talked about levels. Um
Yeah, let's see,
was
which one was
that
that?
Seth Godin's podcast or
No,
was that
let me see which one was. Let me look up real quick. I'm gonna have to, yeah. Tell you what I'll do. Let me just could you shoot an email over and then I will kind of take a look later.
yeah.
I'll send that out happily. I just can't remember exactly.
Yeah, no, for sure. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but that's a good question. I can find that for you. I don't remember whose podcast it was. Yeah, but it's a really
Thanks
cool.
so much.
He gets into the end. He actually got into a conversation. It was really what different direction than I ever thought it was going to. He got into a conversation around spirituality, and I'm like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. It was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I because I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially that have to do with business and entrepreneurship as well. So I'm curious. I'm always looking for new ones that are good finds.
Cool. Yeah. No, this I don't particularly care for the actual podcast, but this particular episode was really good.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on bootstrapping a company? Because I'm realizing more and more now that with like 3 partners we have 3 members of the team right now. And we have interns obviously coming in for Zip. What's the strategy in your opinion? I know it's per business and it's different for each business on bootstrapping. Do you invest per partner as the equity you hold? You kind of invest more if you have more equity, or do you recommend, I don't know, like what was your strategy when you bootstrapped your company? I know you were probably closer to 30 than 20 when you did it, but did you invest maybe $10,000 or less into your first business?
Man, first of all, this is a really, really hot topic right now. Is understanding sort of what I would call business capitalization strategy. Is how every business requires money to start. Some a lot, some a little. Like if you're starting, if you're going to go bring a drug to market, you got to imagine how much money you're going to need to get that done. Software is going to be middle of the road. You're going to need quite a bit of money, but certainly not as much as if you're bringing a medical device or drug. And then obviously like a consumer packaged goods company, you can do it very frugally. In fact, a lot of students that I work with are doing this purely bootstrapping. So really the question becomes, how do you capitalize the business? So, wow, lots of things here. So first and foremost, your first question, what do I think about it? I think it's freaking awesome. And I think that more people should think about bootstrapping than anything else, because like the likelihood of you doing it is higher than anything else. Some of the statistics I shared during my personal finance class, which is why I talk about this, and this is all data from Fundable. You can look it up. But I think the opportunities for entrepreneurs to get VC is 1 in 2,000 or 0.05%. Getting angel investing is less than 1% at 0.91%. That doesn't mean you're not going to get it, and that doesn't mean you're not going to get it later stage. But the truth of the matter is that if we want to charge down this path, whatever it is, and we really want to get to a point where there's enough traction where we can go raise money, then we're going to have to bootstrap most oftentimes. Period. And what I found with my first business is that, it was a services business primarily, education, later product, is that most people didn't want to invest in us because it wasn't just one of those high growth Silicon Valley, software as a service startups. I was actually blessed because when we sold the business, guess who I didn't have to share my money with, which was awesome, right? But again, on the front side of it is like you don't have that financial help, which was the downside. The second part of your question is like, how do you track it and how do you keep work? So there's a great book. We talk about it, the Zip Launchpad. It's called Slicing Pie. And it's a nice way of thinking about how your investments of both money and time should be counted towards equity later. I highly recommend the book. It's called Dynamic Equity Allocation. And I would strongly encourage you to think about a dynamic allocation model because not everyone contributes evenly. And the business partner that I'm working on my next business with, we're talking about this as well because he doesn't want to be a full-time operator, but we're both going to put in the same amount of money to start, but I'm going to be a full-time operator, so it's like, well, how do you slice that up? Right. So you got to think about like the framework with which you're going to be dividing up equity pre-series A.
Okay. Awesome.
So yeah. So those are the two. Did I answer everything?
That was pretty much everything. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, no worries.
I have
Yeah.
a question about your finance class.
Yeah.
You said another one starts in April.
Yes.
How could I get information for that to sign up?
Well, I can send you the link if I can figure it out. It's the, let's go to mentorboost.com/workshops, but let me see if I can just send you let me see if I can do this really quick.
/ what was it?
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I think you can see my can you see my screen still?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, let me just copy and paste that in.
Perfect. Awesome. And
You
I can
can see
just
it right
sign
there.
up in that link then?
Yeah, if you go down here, like there's a little sign, these are closed, but these are open here still.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'll put it in the chat too, now that I've copied it.
So Chris, I have a question.
Sure.
You went through a pretty cool and unique MBA program. What would you say? Would you say that an MBA is beneficial when starting your own company, or is it something that you did because of unique circumstances, or how relevant would you say the MBA was to what you wanted to do?
Oh boy, relevant. How much fun did I have, or how relevant was it? Relevant was low on the scale. Fun was an absolute 10. It was unbelievably fun experience. The relevancy. So I got my MBA purely because I felt inadequate in the Silicon Valley without it, and that was a shitty thing, right? When when I worked at Siebel Systems, which was the first kind of big Silicon Valley job I had, I was a technical project manager. And Tom Siebel, who I don't know if you know who he is, he actually just launched. He just actually IPO'd his next business, which is C3 AI. Which is an artificial intelligence business. Really interesting company if you want to follow it. But Tom Siebel would go around the room and say, "Tell me where you got your MBA." And someone would say, it was Wharton School of Business at Penn. And then when they say Harvard, Stanford. And they got to me, I'm like, well, I went to San Diego State. I had a good time, and it was one of those things where I just felt super inadequate. And, the truth of the matter is that was just all me personally. I really didn't need it. And it didn't help me really at all in the entrepreneurial world. It was super fun though. And I would recommend it if you're looking for that kind of just filling in some blanks. Like I wasn't very strong in finance, which is hysterical now that I teach finance. But I wasn't very strong in it. So for me, it filled in some blanks, but mostly it was just the feelings of personal inadequacy, comparing myself again, not looking forward, but looking left and right and saying, well, what do you have? Well, what do you have? And not worrying about my own past. So I kind of broke all the rules I just shared with you, which is why I shared them with you. Which is, get it. Yeah, it's a phenomenal experience, but only get it if you really think, it makes sense to you. And I don't think it really is super important to being an entrepreneur.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of in the same spot. I'm wondering if I want to go finish my last year and get my MBA, or just kind of take it easier with my undergrad and take some different classes. So that's beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, don't get your MBA right away. It's not like law school or med school. Give yourself 5 to 7 years of real world experience and bring that experience into the MBA program. You'll get so much more out of it. Because if you come in with no real world experience, it's just, you can't relate any of the stuff you're talking about to actual business. You haven't seen the BS and the good and the bad and whatever. So go get some real experience and then go get your MBA. At least 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's kind of funny. I'm sure Byrne, he kind of told me the opposite, but thank you.
No, I think that's shit advice.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Chris?
I have one last question, Chris.
Yep.
So for those of us who, with every entrepreneurial journey, you start with an idea. Tell us explicitly what is the first step, to turn that into a business, right? Is it a book, right? I know those of us who are on Zip Launchpad kind of know, but for everyone else who hasn't got the experience yet, what is the first step?
You mean you're like, hey, I have this idea. Like, how do you start executing on it? You mean?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. I think you nailed it. I think there's no better book on the planet than, either probably not Eric's book, Lean Startup, but Running Lean by Ash Maurya. I think that's the most practical and pragmatic way to methodically walk through, the idea and validating all the different steps, from validating the problem, just like we do in Zip, right? Validating the problem, validating a solution that solves the problem, and then putting it all together in product market fit with your MVP and saying, does this shit actually work? And I think that book is probably the best. I still reference it you know, when it comes to like solution interviews and stuff, there's just a lot of gems in that book. I think, yeah, so Running Lean, I think, is probably my go-to for that.
Sweet. Thanks, Chris.
See you, whoever TJ Bailey is. There's no first name there. Nice meeting you.
It's Trevor. Nice to meet you too.
Oh, nice to meet you, Trevor.
All right, guys, we're about 2 minutes from 5 o'clock, so we can wrap this up if anyone doesn't have any more questions for Chris. Chris, thank you so much. But if anyone has any last questions.
It was nice seeing some people I knew and, you know, meeting some people I didn't. So it was awesome having you. Good luck 2021. I'm excited to see some of you at the Zip Launchpad and the Lavin, and yeah, like, email with anything, you know. Obviously, I'll obviously super stoked in helping a fellow Aztec. So let me know what I can do.